All right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show. You one-stop shop for all things Commanders. We're into draft season, and it is our privilege to bring you the best and the brightest in the industry. Today, we are doing that also with the sax man, Matt Waldman. Matt, how are you?
Man, it's a pleasure. I'm doing well. I'm getting a chance to relax a little bit and get to talk about the work that you spend all year doing. So it's a great time of
Absolutely.
year for those of us who analyze, rookies. So this is the work's done, but it's time to be able to just share and when you're cooped up in a room watching a lot of tape all year long, you got a lot you want to say.
Let's see. For those that don't know, Matt does the rookie scouting portfolio every year. Matt, it's out. How long has this been? How long have you been doing this for now, bud?
This is 21 years. So I started
Ooh.
in 2006. Um, and we were talking about that we both lived in Athens at one time. I wrote the first RSP um, from where was the name of that hotel? That's the Foundry Hotel, the that was downtown, not far from Weaver D's that people remember from the REM song "Automatic for the People." Um, I wrote my first RSP in a hotel room that I spent about a week finishing up film and essentially got everything that I needed done to figure out if I really wanted to do this. So it's 21 years. It's a study of quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. I've looked at about 164 prospects. I go through a very detailed study that where I show you all my work, all the criteria, how I define it, how I compare players across criteria, and then write up scouting reports for you. And then you get also the KISS method of like rankings tables. So if you just want to look at that and with a little commentary, you can do that. But I slice it and dice it up in a variety of ways so that you can kind of see where players differentiate themselves within their position and also understand how I evaluate and why I evaluate it the way that I do. And so it's an unvarnished look at these guys' absence of draft capital because there's a lot of great draft analysts out there who are they're also trying to do mock drafts. And so if
Mhm.
you're doing a mock draft and you're also studying players, generally what you're doing is you're playing the telephone game and interviewing people to figure out where these guys are going to go. And so, not all guys have their rankings influenced by that, but some of them do because they're trying to predict what round they're being drafted. And I'm like, forget that noise. I mean, that's fine to do, but for me, I don't have that access, to that degree. I'm not working for a major network. I just wanted to study talent. And so I take away character out of it. I take away background. I take away where they think they're going to go. And that allows me to have guys ranked in my top 5 who are nowhere near going to be drafted like that. But you oftentimes hit on players because you're looking at their talent as a result of that. And then I have a post draft that comes out that goes along with the purchase of the pre-draft guide. And that's more based on draft capital, landing spot, and then I focus on that kind of thing because I figure I'm not going to spend my time trying to predict that. I'd rather have it happen and I can say, okay, now this guy I ranked 5th, he's second now because he lands in a spot. It's a great fit for him based on the depth chart, based on the fit and the long term outlook for him. And so you get both of those things, and you can find it at my site mattwaldman.com.
Mm.
The RSP is old enough to drink now. What's the biggest change? What's the biggest changes between then and now, Matt?
Well, back then I I really had a I was in operations management with a specialization in process management. So as I had a scout tell me in about year 3, he said your process was light years ahead of what the NFL is doing in terms of like how you document things, how you structure things. He said your scouting obviously is still a work in progress with where you're going, but with what you're doing with your process, it's heading in the right direction. So I'd say that my understanding of the techniques and concepts and skills that all the position players use has really upped its game over those years. Like I was still a novice when I started out, just wanted to see if there's something that I could continue to learn and get better at. And now I've had now I've been doing work where, Will Hewlett, quarterback coach for Caleb Williams and for Brock Purdy, he would hit me up and say, "Hey, can you give me some scouting reports on Brock pre-draft? And I'm going to be working with him. What do you think?" And so I would send him stuff that he could look at the reports, pick out film stuff, and then review it with Brock and see what Brock thought about things like that. Or, there I've gotten a chance to do some work for some other coaches as well. Or, there was a player that I liked out of Northern Illinois by the name of Chad Spann, who I ended up getting him a gig essentially with CJ Procise because I had critiqued the CJ Procise video, and he took it, and his brother wrote me and said he took it to his running back coach at Notre Dame and said, "These are critiques I'm seeing. They seem to make sense, but what do you think?" And he's like, "Yeah, you should listen to that. And in fact, maybe you need to find somebody. Maybe it can help you find someone to coach you to get you ready for the draft." So it's those techniques have paid off like that. And I'd say it's also just I've refined how I scored and defined things in a way where I feel like I'm giving more and more context that's helpful to how I evaluate the player. Whereas in the past, it was like the process was in its foundation and it allowed me to build on top of that because it's about continuous improvement and how you define things. But at the earliest stages, I would say compared to what I'm doing now, where I had successes in relative to that, it felt like dumb luck now when I look back at it compared to what I know now. Now I know enough to go, here's what I really don't know. So I think that's the difference.
Hey, Matt, it seems like it's definitely a passion project for you and something that you work on. I'm just curious about the process. You keep referring to the process over and over again. This is a year-long thing for you. It's something that you kind of do all year long. It sounds like it is. And then how many prospects do you typically go through in a year? And is there a particular position you like better or you find more interesting than other?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I spend all year doing this for sure, and this is, it's how I make my living. So, when I started out, yeah, I mean, I probably couldn't pay for my mortgage after the first 3 years I did this, and I'm just talking 1 month of mortgage.
Yeah.
And I was working a few jobs, but now this is my job. So,
Mm-hmm.
this has been my full time job pretty much for 12 years, 12, 15 years, somewhere around there. But it's what I generally do is during the year, I tend to aim for 150 prospects.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can do more than that, I'll do more than that. I generally do somewhere between 165 to 180. But
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes what happens is some of these guys don't declare and they go back to school.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just in the bank for next year, and
Exactly.
I'll watch some more of their tape, the next year as well. But I'll typically try to watch at least 4 games for every player. Generally, it's between 6 and 8 where I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually tracking information. And when I say I watch, it's more studying in a very structured way with a checklist for each position that has like between probably 100 and 150 points that are well defined about what I'm looking for, and
Mm-hmm.
those are in the back of the book. And then I have structures for how I score it. So I'm doing all that, and I'm tracking stats. I create my own analytics because, as some of my analytics friends would say, they say most people see you as a film guy, but they don't know that you're actually an analytics person who's
Yeah.
watching film, and
Mm-hmm.
you're trying to make the film as objective as possible. So I do my own quarterback charting, my own receiver charting, my own running back tackles broken charting. I break it
Mm-hmm.
down into more granular aspects so that I can provide data on that as well and track things over the long term. Because I'm sure if we talk about running backs or wide receivers, I can tell you about things like, Terry McLaurin, I always joke, is the bumblebee of wide receivers because from the standpoint of like bumblebee, the physics of flying, bumblebees shouldn't be able to get off the ground, but they fly around quite well. I would say that Terry McLaurin has catching technique, attack technique that's like a bumblebee. It should not work. He's
Yeah.
like a 1976 wide receiver who traps everything,
The
but
best
he
forearm catcher in
catches
the
it.
league. We always joke
Yeah,
about that all the
yeah,
time.
exactly. It's like it should not happen, and
Yeah.
I would be more than like I was happy for him that he succeeded because you root for the players you're evaluating, even if you don't feel good about certain things where they're at. And I
Mm-hmm.
thought, well, this is going to be a problem for him. He's going to have to work on this. and he hasn't. He's one of 4 receivers I've studied in 21 years that like him, early Doucette, um, and Golden Tate, and this year might be Skylar Bell. And before that, when I just was watching casually, and I remembered when I started looking, it was Marvin Harrison Sr.
Oh, wow.
Marvin Harrison Sr. You look at him and go, does he watch Ahmad Rashad? Was who he watched? Because it was like, very rarely we see him use his hands. So
funny, I never considered that. Yeah, interesting.
So yeah, we look for all that. I look at all that stuff, and then usually by January, by the end of February, I'm done watching tape. And then it's really about spot checking stuff. And I have access to all 22. So I can see most of any game, and I can kind of look for things and spot check things that I want to see that I didn't see enough of. So if I want to watch, I'll often watch way more than more games than what I actually charted. But after I've charted a sample, I go, I'm not really clear on this guy's release work, or whether he can execute this type of a break, or whether he has ever encountered this kind of situation. I can look enough within a day and go, okay, I've looked at 300 plays already today, and I can find whether he's done that 3 or 4 times, or 4 or 5 times, or never at all, and go, okay, I can move on to the next thing. It doesn't mean I catch everything, but it's gotten better in that respect. So yeah, then I put everything together that I've written up and researched in March, and then it's out on April 1st.
You mentioned, Matt, the all 22, and the NFL has come around and is pretty good now. You can get pretty good access to it. The college football is certainly on the other end of the spectrum. What other than greed? Why are they so stingy with the all 22? Do you think?
I think that it's still a very divided up into fiefdoms. So like, even though there are fewer divisions or conferences, back in the day, you could see that there were sites that used to do cut-ups of players, and there's still sites that probably do that, but there was one that used to do it pretty frequently. And from what it looked like, they would get flagged if it was an in-conference game. So like, if it was an SEC game, like between Auburn and Mississippi, it was likely to get flagged, and they'd want to make sure that they got what was due them. But if it was Auburn versus UCLA, well, the Big Ten and the SEC couldn't agree on who got what and how much they should get, and they just didn't even want to mess with each other about it as a whole. Okay. So you would see that some of these sites would figure out, interconference games, conference games like outside of each other are better, but if you have a conference schedule, don't put up the conference schedule stuff. So that's probably part of it. I think, and they've had, so I mean, but if you are someone that has been able to establish yourself, or you can develop relationships with grad assistants, or even, you can usually request, and they're happy to share things with you.
Gotcha. Matt, fortunately for the Commanders, they are not in the need of a quarterback this year. Feels like a down year. Are you able to sell me on the number 1 overall pick?
I don't know if I will, but I'll give it a shot, because I really like Mendoza. I think that I think Mendoza he scored out for me on par with Caleb Williams, who I felt was the top quarterback in the class. And I felt like he was the quarterback that if you put him in the worst situation, that he would be, as I've talked about it, more of a thermostat player rather than a thermometer player. Even with the bad players around him, it may not look good from a stat standpoint, but you could see that he would be the constant, and he'd be able to outgrow the criticism and the scrutiny, and you'd start to see his play emerge and be a good player. And fortunately, the Bears got it right after they got it completely wrong in year 1 on how to work with him and put a structure around him. I mean, I think that Fernando Mendoza is that kind of a player. He's not mobile. He's mobile. He's more mobile than you think, but he's more of a move around the pocket, slide, make the throw, play action roles. But when you need him to run, it's kind of like watching Justin Herbert or Andrew Luck and how they move. He's a lot faster than you realize. He's bigger than you realize at 236, and he's shown the ability to get chunk plays. He's not going to break it wide open like Daniels does, that's for sure. But at the same time, too, he's good in the pocket. He reads the middle of the field well. The mistakes that he makes are more common with top end prospects than they are like major concerns. He tends to correct himself when he has a misread and end up, the next time the defense tries to test him in that game with a similar look, he tends not to fall for it. He's very accurate. I would say in the vertical range of the field, which is beyond 27 yards, like between about 28 and 42 yards. He's very good in that respect. So, you combine all those things, and I think he's scheme versatile in the sense that you could play him in pistol, but you could also put him under center. And I think that, it doesn't mean he's not going to struggle year one. He's not going to have a Jaden Daniels year one, but he's very capable of having a Caleb Williams year one and then a Caleb Williams year two. And I think that that's what we're going to see with him. I mean, they're the two of the three highest scoring players at the position I've had in the past 7 years. And one of them where I missed was Anthony Richardson, mainly because what I contended with Anthony Richardson was he's not green or raw. He's just inexperienced. And there's a difference because when you see a green or raw player, they're the guys like Will Levis who doesn't read coverage well at all. And even if he's seen the same type of coverage, he makes the same kind of game management mistakes. Whereas with Richardson, it was more like you could see him pair things together, disparate ideas and situations together, and really create something that is high level when he understood what he was seeing. But when he's never seen some of the things before, it was just unfamiliar with him. It was an inexperienced thing, not that you've seen this thing a million times and you still can't figure it out. And so if I'm going to change something in the near future with quarterbacks, it would be, I've learned from Anthony Richardson is that I agree with Drew Brees in the sense that you need to have 50 or 60 starts combined, college and pro, for you to really know what a quarterback has. So I'm going to have kind of a baseline for their decision making and their coverage reading and their game management and their processing abilities, where they've got to hit certain tiers of games started so that they can reach certain tiers of value that I would assign. So even though I've seen things that are advanced with a player like Anthony Richardson, but there wasn't enough starts to really see enough varieties to feel comfortable and not take bad chances, then he's got to stay in a tier below what he's actually showing the potential to be. So that way I'm not over projecting value, 'cause it's not that I'm assuming the guy's going to get there, but but I don't want to show too much optimism about that. So that's an example of like just learning from where you have players and you see that there are opportunities that they didn't hit the way you thought they might.
Matt, you once told me that there were two kind of quarterbacks, bakers and chefs. Bakers being ones that need the recipe to get the product finished, and chefs that can kind of just go into the kitchen and make it happen. I'm assuming that Mendoza projects as a baker.
That's interesting. I would actually say that he looks like a baker, but he's actually more like a chef.
Okay.
It's just because he does create well off script. It's just that he's had the most success we've seen of him in this platform was with Indiana, where they had a great running game, a lot of play action. But if you go back to Cal, there's a lot of his tape where he's creating and he looks good. His Cal tape looks as good to me as his Indiana tape. It's just Indiana had more success. Like I go back and I watch the teams that he was facing, and like he They last year at Cal or 2 years ago at Cal, they lost I think 9 games, and 8 of them they lost them by less than 10 points total,
Oh wow.
and they were most really high scoring affairs. So what you're seeing is that Cal may not have been uber talented, but they had a guy in Mendoza who kept them close and in battles. And I watched a lot of those games studying other players, and I was like, I didn't see the offense. I was watching the opposing offense, but I'd look at the scores and I'd go, wow, Cal's really playing this team tight. I wonder who's on this team that's like, what's going on? I bet there's some future prospects here that are going to be interesting to see. And then when I saw Mendoza, and and first heard of him in Indiana, and then I went to go studying him, and I go, where did he play before Indiana? I saw Cal, and I just started laughing, and I was like, okay, this might be fun. This might work out to be all right that we have that kind of a situation. And so when I went after I studied him, and I was like, yeah, he looked great. I was trying to look for a little color to add layers to what I had already seen, and I saw that margin of losses in terms of margin of points, and I was like, that's ridiculous. That like it was, I think it was like 17 points total out of 9 games. But if you subtract one game that they lost by like 10 points, it was like 7 points out of 8 games or
That's
something
crazy.
crazy
That's
like
nuts.
that. Yeah.
Hey Matt, I find the wide receiver in class a little bit very, very interesting, right? Definitely there's a need in Washington. We actually have Terry McLaurin, 30-year-old ex receiver, looks very strong. At number 7, there's talk about potential Carnell Tate. People really like him a lot. But it's funny, overall, like this class is kind of interesting, right? People are like, hey, is there truly a top 10 pick of these wide receivers? Jordan Tyson, Carnell Tate, Mekhi Lemon, they're very strong. But in other years, they're truly comparable to Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and so on and so forth. I'm curious, what are your takeaways from the top of the class? Like, Carnell Tate, Tyson, Lemon, are they worthy of top 10 picks in your opinion? And then maybe like talk about maybe a third round pick for Washington, number 71.
Sure. I'm a big Tate fan. I mean,
Okay.
like I have him scored as a franchise caliber grade. He would have been on par with a guy like Luther Burden, who I had scored higher than most. And then 2 years before that, where I had Malik Neighbors. I had Malik Neighbors at a 95, Roma Dunze at a 93. Marvin Harrison Jr. was pretty high too, even though I had concerns about his hands at a 92. I have Tate in that tier.
Wow.
He's in that tier of players. He's on the lower end of it, but that's an instant starter who should be able to make a strong impact on a team that needs a receiver right away. So Tate's a smooth route runner. To have him even complement Terry McLaurin year one would be a boon for them. And then even if they decided that they were going to give him spot duty and let him grow into it and replace McLaurin at some point, I think he's more than capable of that. There's people that talk about what he is, and I'd say that he's comparable to me of a guy like Justin Jefferson.
People keep saying that.
Yeah.
I've heard that several times. Yeah.
That's
about body type or play. Why do you reference that?
Excellent route running.
Okay.
And smooth route running, knowing how to set up defenders, not only with his release game, but also at the top of your stems. You want to be efficient, but you also want to understand how to create angles and how to bait defenders without playground moves, but actually establish techniques that are efficient and dynamic to get a defender to turn their hips in the wrong direction or to bite on something. And Tate does that really well. His catch point ability he and Mekhi Lemon have excellent catch point technique when they have to put their hands away from their frame or over their heads. Their hands stay together when they extend. And so many players, even in the pros, can't keep their hands together in that situation because it's difficult to do. Even Pro Bowl caliber players have lapses where they end up clapping onto the ball. Tate doesn't have that, doesn't have it, whether it's tight coverage, whether he's getting hit, whether he has to make crazy extensions. So he's really graceful in that regard. And so, between those, and I think he's an underrated runner after the catch. I mean, he's not Skylar Bell, who they talk about as that third round guy to consider. But he's, Tate's someone that he often catches the ball in traffic, and so he's not getting a ton there. And people look at the production versus Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah, I was
But
going to ask you, like, why do people have that? Like, there's a narrative that he could be a wide receiver two, potentially the next level, but not necessarily one. Is it because, like, hey, he's looking at Ohio State and his, with Jeremiah Smith, his production isn't as high, maybe his 40 time? Like, what are you hearing, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's really what it is those
Okay.
two narratives. I
Okay.
mean, I remember back in the day when Justin Jefferson was the third wheel to Jamar Chase and to Terrace Marshall. Terrace
I remember
Marshall
Terrace Marshall.
was
Yeah.
the truth. That's what
Yeah. I
a
remember
lot of
that. I
people
remember that.
felt,
Yeah. I
you
remember
know.
that.
And now Terrace Marshall's, looking for jobs on a regular basis.
Yeah.
He's had a nice career being on an NFL teams, but
Yeah.
he's not what we were looking for.
Hmm.
And Jefferson was the one that did all the dirty work. And I think that's the thing, is that people see the glamour and the stats and the big play highlights, and they just assume, well, if the other guy's not making as many of them, that he's not as good.
Hmm.
So, and 4.53 is not bad, but we have to remember that my buddy Brandon Angelo, who's a trainer for pro athletes, including football players, and was a track athlete himself at Purdue. He once raced Tyreek Hill.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's
and at
reputable.
an all freshman meet, he said
Yeah.
that they all laughed at him because they were all taller than him, and then they felt his tailwind because usually, the small
They
sprinters are
fly.
usually not that fast,
Yeah.
so or as fast as the other guys. So he's told stories, but one of the things that he once shared on one of our initial episodes is that most track measurement systems for like times, there's like three tiers of them, and the international meets and the top meets use a certain version of it,
Hmm.
and the NFL uses either the second tier or third tier one, that has a higher variation
Mm.
in error rate. Like,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, so like I want to say it's something like plus or minus 2.25 seconds. It
Mm.
might be that high. I have to go back and look, but if that's the case, I mean, that's the difference between, say,
449. Whatever.
yeah,
Yeah. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
four
Exactly.
three
Yeah.
even,
Oh wow.
and
Okay.
that's
Okay.
how crazy that could be. So when scouts are saying we hand timed it at 4.48,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's a half a it's a half a second. No, it's not a half a second, but it's 50th of a second, higher or lower. That's a big difference.
It is.
Yeah, so it's not as reliable on that standpoint, and a lot of 4.5 receivers are big play threats,
Yes, they are. Yes, they are.
and they have more complete games. Whereas a lot of the 4.3 receivers are resting on their 4.3 speed, but they
Hmm.
can't catch a cold, they can't run a route, and they have more difficulties to ensue. Now you'd like to have both,
Hmm.
but if you're going to pick one, you want the guy who's fast enough, who has excellent technique and reliability with their hands, and can do just about everything you're going to ask them to do the minimum standard for a starter. That's why when I look at like RAS score, or relative athletic score, it's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
nice thing, but you're looking at percentile. I don't need to know if you're in the 32nd percentile at this particular um, exercise. I need to know if the 18th percentile is the minimum standard for
Hmm.
what you're looking for from a starter. What's
Benchmark.
the minimum number?
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
yeah. So
Is
say it's up there.
I was gonna say, is Tate clearly your number one then in your opinion? Would you have any qualms taking him at number seven?
Nope, not at all. He would be my top player on the board overall among the skill positions. I
Wow.
think he's in his own tier, just like I thought Malik Neighbors was in his own tier 2 years
Wow.
ago. That's
Okay.
so he's not as good as that, but I think it's close enough that we might look at highlights, and if you're just looking at highlights, you might not know as much of a difference. You might prefer one thing over the other, but he's there. Makai Lemon is at the top of the next tier, and that tier is
Hmm.
still a high end instant starter. Like, if
Hmm.
as long as they don't have two really good receivers, he should probably be one of the top two receivers on the team. If not, he's going to
Hmm.
be a dynamite number three in the slot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think he had a
So
28% target share in college or something crazy like that. So he's a target hound. So I think his transferable skills to the NFL are very. You can see the projection very well, very
yeah,
easily.
like I said, with his hands, great, good skill
Hmm.
after the catch. He's tough.
Hmm.
Got that big play potential in him. You'd probably rather see him in the slot than as a flanker. So when I'm grading at this point, I'm not grading for an NFL team. So I'm
Hmm.
grading for all the possibilities of teams. So
Hmm.
if I were to, when I start looking at what a receiver can do, and that's how this kind of the standards of what I'm grading overall in a philosophy. Well, Tate offers more versatility,
Hmm.
because if teams start going back to playing more 12 and 13 personnel due to all these nickel defenses like we've been seeing, then they got to move Lemon over to a flanker. And
Hmm.
I'd say Tate's a better route runner than Lemon is on man-to-man timing routes, whereas
Hmm.
Lemon is a very good zone route runner
Hmm.
and can get tons of catches
Yeah.
in that area. But like, once we see fit, I could see where as a fit, draft capital and fit, I might go, well, I'll be recommending to fantasy GMs to play Makai Lemon number one overall if he lands in a certain
Absolutely.
thing. But I'm
Absolutely.
still going to be able to say, I still think Carnell Tate is the most talented receiver in this class.
I
He's
guess,
just got
yeah.
to find the right fit.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Matt, it's not a draft podcast if I don't ask about some Bulldogs. So tell me what you think about Zachariah Branch and Dylan Bell at the next level.
I think Dylan Bell can probably be a contributor who gives you kind of that athletic combination that makes him like a capable outside receiver who you can use in 3 and 4 receiver sets, and he can get open against zone coverage and make some athletic plays. And I think that is probably where he winds up. And if he can continue to work, maybe he does grow into something more. Um, Branch is the guy that you look at him and I think that everything about his game is appealing except his route running. Like his route
Yeah.
running, and that's unfortunately a major part of receiver play. It's like there's flaws in pretty much from his releases, his stems, his setups, and his breaks. It's doesn't mean that it's all a mess at the same time, but you from route to route you see loose ends with different things appear, sometimes in combination, sometimes isolated. And so he's going to have to address those things to emerge as a compelling option and not just a gadget slot Nicole Hardman, Tavon Austin type of player. And I think the potential's there for him to do it, but because route running is so important and there are so many, you know, his career could die. His potential as a starter could die a death of 1,000 paper cuts because of the route stuff that he has to fix.
Yeah.
If he can fix it all, he suddenly now you're looking at could he be an aspiring Jordan Addison? Could he exceed that? And suddenly now we're talking about well, there small receivers who are good. There's Devonta Smith, there's Jordan Addison, there's Zachariah Branch, but you could also be looking at it and going, Zachariah Branch, Pro Bowl punt returner, Pro Bowl kick returner,
Yeah.
occasional guy we throw RPOs and stretch the field for everybody else to work underneath him.
Hmm.
And one last one for me on the receivers. Tell us a little bit about Braswell from Tennessee.
I like this kid. A lot of people logo scout in the public eye, and so they look at
Dante Thornton.
they look at Dante Thornton or they look at the what was his name? The kid with the Giants who was the speedster, and then and also the Browns receiver, that they've had. And these are all guys that have played in this Baylor-esque, scheme and haven't succeeded at a high level. But let's remember that Razzle also played at Tulane for most of his career. So he's had exposure to different things. And on top of that, too, you can see that I'm not a big logo scout guy. Now, if you tell me that all the Clemson quarterbacks, as one scout said to me, all the Clemson quarterbacks in recent years playing in Dabo Sweeney's system really haven't developed at the level that they need to, and that the offense may hold them back from becoming as conceptually gifted as they could become. I could see merit in that. I don't think that's logo scouting. I think that's scouting the system and seeing how the system impacts. But if you're going to tell me that all that Georgia doesn't put out good running backs because recently they haven't had, the Terrell Davises, Rodney Hamptons, Olandis Garys, or player or Nick Chubbs and Sony Michelle's out there, and it's the past 3 years it's been bad. I would just say, yeah, let's call them the logo scouting on that end of this of the stick. So I think that with this, it's more that he runs good routes. He has nice bend. He's just going to have to get used to dealing with reading defensive coverages at an NFL level that might take him maybe a year to really start to emerge. Otherwise, because of that spread out system at Tennessee, maybe he's getting simpler coverage looks to have to read and make decisions about with his quarterback to be on the same page, where it's going to be a lot more complex at this next level, and it might take him a little more time.
So, Matt, just one more going along with wide receivers. I do think it's very intriguing, and it's a need for Washington. Talking about that third round pick at number 71 overall, Chris Brazel, we kind of talked about him potentially. I've seen Elijah Surratt in potential drafts. You mentioned Skylar Bell as well. I guess my first question is, can you walk away with a starting wide receiver in the third round, in your opinion? It seems like a pretty, maybe at the high end class, but a pretty deep class people are talking about. I don't know if you agree with that. And then who are some people to keep an eye out for around that mid range?
Yeah, I definitely agree that it can be I think this class, maybe the highest end is, one or two players less than what we've seen in the past few years.
Okay.
But the number of players who could wind up being statistically compelling contributors and higher is equal to last year's class.
Okay.
So I think there's 38 players that are draftable if you were going to go that far as what I thought last year. So Skylar Bell certainly is one of those players that I like, mainly because he reminds me of, like, if Jamar Chase were at the top of the pyramid of this comparison spectrum, and say Khalil Shakir was in the middle of it, he'd be, I think, if I remember correctly, this was a former Washington receiver. He reminds me of Lavernius Coles.
Absolutely, Coles.
Yeah. So he's physical. He's great after the catch. His curvilinear movement, his ability to bend around obstacles. He's had some plays that I've never seen before from a receiver doing that at a tight of an angle, and he makes really tough catches, but he does it like McLaurin. He's a clap attacker.
Okay.
He's a serial clap attacker. But the ones that, when I study those guys who were those exceptions, there were one of two things that they did really well that made them exceptional, if you ask me. And one is that they could catch with proper technique if you really needed them to, like Golden Tate could. I think early Dissett could too. A lot of the clap attackers who fail, it's because they tried catching it the right way, and they fail so often that they got to just deal with this secondary way, and and even that they're not comfortable with. And then the other guys are like Marvin Harrison and Terry McLaurin, which are like, we've been doing this all along as our primary technique, and we just have that kind of hand-eye coordination that very few people have to be able to do it successfully, and we don't drop the ball as often as most of these serial clap attackers. And Skylar Bell kind of fits both of those categories. So I'm betting on him being that good and being able to eventually start, or if not, I think he could be a starter right away. So whether Washington wants a smaller receiver who can play bigger than he looks and they can move him around a bit, I think Skylar Bell will eventually be good enough to be moved around, but you could use him in kind of a Jaden Reed kind of Khalil Shakir sort of way, and then he can grow into what Coles eventually grew into. And then if he really knocks it out of the box and just suddenly just improves by leaps and bounds, maybe we'll look at him to a degree like Jamar Chase, but I don't think that's happening. I would say that probably if you want a bigger receiver, I think NFL teams like this guy more than the draft media does, and that's Malachi Fields out of Notre Dame.
I've heard about him.
He was out of UVA, former quarterback, moved on to Notre Dame. He's 6'4", 218. He's not very fast in terms of the 40 time, but his burst in terms of his 20 shuttle and his change of direction are elite. And he makes people miss. He gets good position, at the catch point. His routes are very good. I've heard some, my buddy Dave Kluge over at footballguys.com went to the Senior Bowl, and he said there are a lot of people talking about how Fields looked like the best route runner on the field in that situation. And some of the things I saw on film were sharp breaks, where that's where he got separation, was at the top of the stem and into the break, and he was able to get his most separation at that point of the field. So those two guys are interesting. You mentioned Brazel; he's certainly on that list. I think that Chris Bell's that guy that's ultimate risk reward swing. I would say I'm equally scared to draft that guy as I am not to draft that guy.
Okay.
Because at 6'2", 222, when you watch him catch a slant or or a crosser or an over route and watch him split the multiple angles of a defense and just pull away, that's enticing. It feels like, you're watching AJ Brown earlier in his career, or what people thought Traylon Burks would be, or a
Mm-hmm.
guy I compared him to, who I absolutely loved. It was my first, I would call him my first dysfunctional receiver love, is uber talented guys like Josh Gordon, and how
Over
he
Josh
was,
Gordon, yeah.
My first was Michael Westbrook.
Yeah, that's
You
my guy.
know,
I love Michael
I
Westbrook. He's
love
great.
Michael. Yeah,
Colorado, yeah, for sure.
yeah. I love Daryl Green would just wax poetic about how he would beg this guy to approach his game differently
Yeah.
in the media and talk about how good he could become. And when
Mm-hmm.
he had that Pro Bowl season with the broken wrist, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that was incredible how
Mm-hmm.
he was playing, but he just couldn't keep it all together. And I think Chris
Yeah.
Bell's that player that I'm feared some of that with, because it's like one series or one game, it looks all great, and then the next, or it's the next series or the next play, there's loose ends everywhere. So,
Mm-hmm.
but he's that ultimate gamble. Another other third round guys are like, probably someone like Antonio Williams out of Clemson, who could be a slot flanker. But they probably want to go bigger in Washington. So
That's a
let's
debate.
talk.
We don't know yet. So maybe we're
Yeah,
thinking maybe bigger to kind of match on the other side of McLaurin. But we also haven't had a slot wide receiver since Jamison Crowder. I mean, we have Jalen Lane right now. I'm sure you scoured him last year.
yeah,
He's kind of a work in progress, more of a punt returner, kick returner, as opposed to a slot guy. But he's our current slot with Luke McCaffrey. So I don't know if they're looking to upgrade there. So
yeah. That's true. And but you also think, okay, what they've changed from a coaching staff perspective, you
yeah.
could see how they might want to go two tight ends or three tight ends and
Mm-hmm.
emphasize the running game more. So
Mm-hmm.
now you're looking at more of a flanker or a slot or a guy like, if Denzel Boston fell to you,
Mm-hmm.
that would be fantastic. You know, he's in that range where you could say he's a poor man's Nico Collins or a rich man's T Higgins,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in that range, just like Malachi Fields. Jeremy Bernard maybe is someone that you could probably play at flanker. Josh Cameron's interesting as kind of a discount version of, um, Chris Bell, in terms of like, he catches the ball well, a lot of route tools, just doesn't get open with those route tools
Mm-hmm.
off the line of scrimmage as you'd like to see right now, but he has a lot of them in store. Um, I think that those are guys that you can probably get in the third round. And then you could probably look deeper and see guys like Eric McAllister out of TCU, 6'4", 194. I know people hate the TCU program for what they've seen, but he's someone that kind of is in that George Pickens kind of comparison stylistically. Both he and Jacoby Lane can go up and get it, but I think McAllister
Mm-hmm.
has more after the catch, and he has more potential as a route runner than Jacoby Lane. It's close, but it's just slightly better. Um, and I think that, late round guys, well, we won't go late round guys at this point, but I mean, I think that those are enough to really mention.
Yeah.
Elijah Surratt, he's another one,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Matt, you
Okay.
mentioned the coaching change to Blau. Do you like that system as an upgrade over the previous system? And do you think it eventually is better for Jaden Daniels' overall growth?
It's a great question. And you're thinking Blau being more of an advent of the Detroit system that we've seen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If that's the case, then I would say absolutely, because you are giving your quarterback more structure, um, and you're giving him less predictable. Cliff Kingsbury has always had a reputation for, it's great year one, and then it never seems to build on itself in subsequent years, and that defenses have kind of been able to adjust to what he does, and and it just never they never counter. And I think that obviously with that alone, that's not good for a quarterback. So I think, with Blau's system, if it's more Detroit based where you have two tight ends, defenses have to play things in a more straight up fashion, makes it easier to read what's happening. It gives the Commanders offense more clear cut choices to make. And with play action being a help, it also provides more opportunities in the deep game where Daniels was known to shine at LSU. So I think it definitely helps Daniels. And I was never a big fan of Cliff's offenses anyway at the pro level. So I think that this is, in theory, this is going to be a much better fit for him. And you can you just make it harder on the defense, and you don't put the onus on the quarterback so early to have to change or do things, or maybe if they don't even let him change and do things because it's Cliff's offense and this is how we're going to do it and it's predictable. But my work is genius, and this is why I've advanced so far and made so much money and have a nice white house somewhere out in California. That when you look his name up on Google, that's all you ever see.
Exactly.
Is that iconic photo of him with
On
his
draft
foot
night.
up on the table on draft night. But I mean, it's like you could make the argument that Cliff Kingsbury is kind of Peter principled himself into the status that he's had on the heels of Johnny Manziel and Kyler Murray, and then when he got to the league, it's like, oh, you mean this can't just work the way it does? And then Washington gave him that chance because there was initial success. Maybe there's more that he's learned with that, but I think them going away from Cliff tells you that they need to diversify that offense, and it will help Daniels more because even running the ball now, you have extra gaps with two tight ends to force defenders to occupy, and look at what Jalen Hurts could do, or Lamar Jackson could do when they ran two tight ends um, as runners. I mean, that just helps the run game unbelievably so, and you can then do the play action off of that. I think it's going to be a boon for him. You're going to see a rebound.
And Matt, my last question, or a follow-up question to what you just said, what do you think is the missing piece there in Washington? Because there is going to be an evolution. I think there is going to be play action. You talked about that 12 and 13 personnel. They got Chikakonkwo, so they do have an additional tight end link. Washington's been looking at Jeremiah Love for maybe more of an explosive running back, maybe there as well. We have that one wide receiver in Terry McLaurin. I guess, in your opinion, should they potentially explore other tight ends, maybe pursue another running back? Is that wide receiver that biggest gap? What knowing where they want to go and where they are right now, what would be the biggest gap in your opinion?
I think it's wide receiver. As
Okay.
much as I was a fan of Ben Sinnott and I was hoping that we
Yeah.
see an opportunity for him to be that guy, and then they got someone like him in Chigo Okonkwo, we know that that's probably out. So they feel like they're rolling there. But when you look at beyond Terry McLaurin, I mean, you don't really have you don't have a big primary receiver or a big flanker or someone who can be like the complement to McLaurin, and he doesn't have to carry the load and maybe be the guy who's the future number 1A to a guy whoever replaces McLaurin will wind up being the 2 or the 1B. And I think that that's where I would want to see them go, because if McLaurin's the receiver Jaden Daniels is most comfortable with, and he's the best receiver on the roster by far, who does he have to grow with? Who's going to show those high-end skills? And also, I think McLaurin maybe isn't. I don't want to say he's a limited receiver because he's a very good one, but maybe he's not always cut out to be that 4th and 15. We need 16. And everyone knows that it's coming to him. Like he can make those plays occasionally, but as a route runner, I think there are guys who maybe are even in a higher tier than McLaurin. And so if you could get a Carnell Tate for this team, you're letting him build on that. Because like Treylon Burks is a great athlete, but I remember studying him and going, well, he doesn't really understand how to run zone routes the way that he needed to. He's a clap attacker at times. He doesn't know how to use his technique to get releases off the line of scrimmage. It's been a few years, so if he continues to work at his game and learn, he could make a difference. But beyond that, I mean, you've got Van Jefferson with you guys as well now, and Van is that guy that like runs great routes. Can't he clap attacks the ball too? He's got
Mm-hmm.
the same issues Marvin Harrison Jr. has, and
Mm-hmm.
long had them. He has the same issues his dad had. If you be honest, was good route runner. Um, he was like the known deep threat who always seemed to drop passes that you wouldn't like to see dropped.
Mm-hmm.
Heck of a coach, but it just he couldn't do that at the highest level. He was just a good journeyman receiver, and I think Jefferson's known for that. So outside of that depth chart, I mean, I could go deeper with all these guys I'm looking at, and I go, yeah, I know all these guys, but like, but but I would say you don't have someone who you have confidence in instantly to really complement McLaurin, and I think that's where I would want to go early.
I agree.
Where, Matt, where do you have Jeremiah Love ranked amongst the recent top end running backs?
He's in the same tier as guys like Jameer Gibbs and Ashton Genty and Bijan Robinson. He expresses it differently. He's a flashier back, kind of a plus version of what Reggie Bush turned out to be.
Mm.
As a player, like when he was in his peak at Miami, or the flashes that you saw early in New Orleans, when he either succeeded trying to carry the world on his shoulders or when he wasn't trying to do too much. You could see those moments from him. So, a little bit, he could be a little bit better with route running, pass receiving. There's some immaturity sometimes with trying to do too much, but most backs have to try a little bit too much sometimes, and that's what happened. But he's easily, if a team said this is the best skill player in the draft, um, I'm not going to argue with them about it, even if I have a higher grade for Carnell Tate or if I like Fernando Mendoza enough that I would consider him too. I mean, if I'm building an NFL team, I'd rather be looking at the quarterback or wide receiver. But
Mm.
if I'm a good team that can get a lot better quickly with a running back because everything else is in place, absolutely Jeremiah Love would be up there.
Mm.
I have one more before we get out of here. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about one more Bulldog. Tell me about Oscar Delp, who I think will be a better pro than he was college player.
I think that's a great assessment. He's such a good blocker for his size, and he's 6'5", 250. So it's not like he's a
Yeah.
6'3", 240 guy. He's not like Chris Cooley, where you would say, all right, we can put him on the wing, we can make him an H-back, and he's good at those types of things. But do we really want him playing a full-time inline role at that size, or Jordan Reed, that type of thing? But I think Delp has really smooth routes. He knows how to use his eyes at the top of stems extremely well to bait defenders who are playing over him, as well as defenders who are trailing him or playing, next to him at as tight at his hip. He can get free in those situations. His hands are good. What I want to see is him have to deal with more contested catch situations and prove that he can make more plays than what I've seen. Like there's times that I felt like with limited reps, he dropped passes that you'd like to see a top end guy catch. But I still think that when I say top end, I'm talking Trey McBride, Colston Loveland, what he did his rookie year down the stretch, George Kittle. He's not that tier yet, but he could be that guy. He could be like Zach Ertz, very reliable
I
at
was
the
gonna say,
catch point, but a better blocker.
do you have a
What's that?
comp for him? I was gonna say, do you have a comp for him for the viewers that might not be familiar with him?
Yeah, I think I do. Let me look at what I said. I want to say it was Zach Ertz. Yep, it is. I have Trey McBride at the top of the tier, as like the aspirational. If he becomes better at the catch point and proves that he's that his blocking continues to grow and he can be in line, he could be in his Trey McBride area. But I have him as his immediate aspirational guy as Zach Ertz. But
Mm.
I think he can be a better blocker than Ertz was,
Yeah.
because I think that he could probably wind up 6'5", 255, 260. And he's such a smart player and just an experienced, heady guy who just dealt with numerous quarterbacks in Athens and changes the system. So he kind of got he got caught up in all of that, and I agree that he could be a better pro.
Matt, we could have done this for another hour, buddy. It's always good to talk to you, and we learn so much having you on. So we appreciate you, man, for sure.
Oh, it's a pleasure, big man. So, I appreciate you guys.
Well, thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.